Brandon, thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you on and tell your SMU story. If you would, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah. Hey, my name is Brandon Blewett. I graduated from SMU in 2005, originally from Houston, did some called backpacking through the Southeast for grad school in my career, and now back in Dallas for 4 years now.
Amazing. Yeah, we'll definitely get into your travel and what you've seen across the United States. But if you can kind of rewind a little bit, if you're from Houston, I imagine had heard of SMU, but what was kind of your origin story of picking SMU as your college of choice?
So I wanted to go to school in a major media market because I was a little bit weird and knew that I wanted to be Jerry Maguire based on a film. It's the best way to pick your career path. So I had
Totally.
narrowed it down largely to Los Angeles with Pepperdine and SMU. And what's interesting is it didn't work out with Pepperdine, but I think it was actually a blessing in disguise because SMU is it's definitely all the schools I've gone to, it means the most to me. And it definitely provided I think the broadest and best network to work with.
And so thinking, where did the media market matter in, the sports
In my
agent
decision.
in the realm, right? Like, because I know the two schools you mentioned at the time aren't sports powerhouses, right? We're
Right.
01, SMU is still figuring things out, but to your point, LA and DFW are big media markets. How did that kind of rationalize in your head?
That's being kind about how we were at the time at
You
SMU,
can say that now.
especially, and we can laugh about it because
Yeah,
how much has changed
yeah,
since then, how awesome things are now. I really looked at it more based on the professional sports media markets and thinking that would, give me access to, potentially people in the media, the sports teams that were there. And that was really the reason behind the decision making. And I'm not saying it was logical. I was 18 at the time and had
yeah, yeah,
picked my career choice based off of a fictional film.
yeah. Well, loosely based on a character, right? I mean,
Correct,
not
correct,
so
correct.
you get to SMU, you're in Dallas, big media market, kind of checks that box. And then is it thinking, okay, I gotta go focus in business, it's gotta be sports management, it's gotta be law. How did you think about what you were gonna major in as we find out you double major in? Maybe you didn't have you just wanted to grab them all. What did you think about studying and what did you ultimately choose to major in and spend time in at SMU?
So I looked at a variety of options, but when I went back to what does a sports agent do, it's essentially corporate matchmaking, right? So I thought, hey, if I'm going to be pairing athletes with companies for advertising purposes, the best thing to do is to major in advertising. So
Mm,
I was at the Timberland Advertising Institute. I also remembered from the opening monologue that Jerry Maguire went to law school. And so I looked up what's the best major to help you prepare for law school in the LSAT. And it was, I think English was one of them. The other one was philosophy. I
okay.
knew I was not going to be a philosophy major.
Yeah.
So English and advertising it was.
Wow. And the the impact those probably majors had 20 years later you didn't realize, but talk about the importance of those 2 degrees in your career development and personal development, and then also touching on you've worked in consulting for a long time, you've h bought companies, you've been a part of implementing new companies, you've hired tons of people, kind of broad range stroke, kind of a picture of, like, what you think students today should be thinking on, right? I know there's a lot of topics on, you know, finance is the language of business, right? Get a degree in
Right.
that and you're set, right? Kind of how do you think about those soft skills and a well-rounded candidate that you've come across so much in your working world?
So I think that for me, I look at it this way. You're always a salesperson. I'm in corporate development. My job has, 50% of it is technical skills. I did major in finance and I was able to learn those, right? And I'm not saying that, you should major in finance if there's anything wrong with that. But I do think that with advertising and, being so front facing and working with businesses that want to pick the right company to acquire, a lot of it is knowing what somebody else wants to hear and learning how to position the message so that either your offer or your company is more attractive or,
Hmm.
to a potential buyer that you're presenting the message in the right way. I mean, I would argue a lot of the Sims or the the memorandums that bankers send out when companies are
Yeah.
for sale, 70% of that is, advertising and marketing.
Right.
And
Totally.
obviously the most important factoids in there are a lot of the numbers around the financials, but you still got to put, some sexy spin on it. So I think that
Mhm.
that major really helped in that capacity. And then I think English is really good because there's such a lack of clear communication. And English, it's obviously not just grammar, but the ability to read complex, whether it's literature or other materials, and analyze it, synthesize it, and make arguments um,
Yes.
for some kind of outcome are basic components that you need in whatever job or profession you decide to pursue.
Do you see the candidates that you're meeting and the young professionals you're meeting have enough of those skills, or are they a little raw and kind of seem to skip over that?
It varies widely, and not even just by institution and not even
Mhm.
by major. So
Yeah.
it is really interesting. I've met several people, even some of the SMU athletes through Life After Ball, that were just incredibly dynamic, articulate, could tell you
Mhm.
exactly what they want to do. And then I've met with so-called rock star academic
Yeah.
students,
Yeah.
call it Emory, that could not explain to me during an interview why they wanted to be a consultant when they were at a consulting interview. And I am
Right.
sure they had prepared for the interview based on the other answers, but couldn't articulate the most basic
Right.
answer to one of the most important questions if you're going to go into that field.
Interesting. Yeah. I go back and forth on kind of where you like. I think it is. It's there's no correct answer, correct box to put them in. You kind of see some of the kids that focus on that, and it's some institutions that have the more liberal arts focus, and they get that. But I wonder as we go forward if people do tend to put themselves in that fast track to a business or a finance job. And to your point, you can learn both, but you don't always have the time to study
Right.
English or some of those other trades when you're not on a college campus. Any classes that stand out, or kind of professors or moments that maybe you look back in your professional career that you're like, I remember learning that, and that's been valuable to you today.
It's funny, I took a creative writing class, and I only took one because you were only required to take one in the English department, and it was probably the most fun class I took, and should have thought about that, and not waited so long to write a book. But
Yeah.
I think that the classes I enjoyed the most, I remember campaigns. We had, Professor Ford, and really getting to see something go from an idea to a whiteboarding session to something completely executed was, in hindsight, very good preparation, because that is what all strategic endeavors are at a company. And I really liked the way that that class was formatted, because it really helped me think about whether it's something small or big, how I go through a process, or a series of processes, to make something successful.
I love that. I'm gonna catch you off guard with this question as you're kind of speaking and knowing how involved you are with life after ball and students, and then a awesome career to date that you've had. What do you think is kind of that special sauce of SMU students that allows them to be so entrepreneurial, successful? Is it the blend of being in a big, city versus a college campus versus a diverse student base? What is it that kind of leads to build the Brandons of the world that are, risk takers, leaders of companies, and then adventuring out to again write a book? Like, I feel like our alumni base has such a cool, diverse
It does.
story to tell.
It does. I don't know that everyone should take the long path like I did to get there, but I'm glad that I wound up where I am. It's an interesting question, and I actually do talk about this in the book. I'm not saying that to like plug my book,
Yeah.
but at SMU, because we were in Dallas, there were a lot of companies and firms that hired at SMU that might not otherwise have had we been located somewhere remote like Sewanee. And
Mhm.
so what I thought was really cool was, yes, it was an incredibly social crowd, but when you knew that a fellow student had an interview with, Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or BCG
Mhm.
or Big Four, you let them take that seriously. And I think because we knew we were perhaps at that time maybe not the tip top school that they were
Mhm.
searching from, that we had to
Mhm.
perform at our A game,
Yep.
people people put in a lot of effort. And I think that showed. And I think it also showed once we started going into the workforce. And I think that is probably the biggest differentiator is, you're smart enough, right?
There you go.
Because
Mhm.
none of the stuff in banking or consulting is rocket science. And so there's a confidence you can do it, but you're having to go up against people from other schools where maybe they're the first selection,
Mhm.
and you had to have the social sauce and
Right.
the tech sauce to be able to do it, which is what I think is kind of a common theme for SMU people in general.
Agreed. Yeah, I think they are well-rounded and have the social skills and the personal skills to be able to kind of sit in any room, right? And I think
Right.
that's also to your point of like how many schools can have this many Fortune 500 companies where those leaders are coming in and talking to classes, and you're having chance to really conversate with them is pretty
Right.
impactful. So jumping back to your journey, Jerry Maguire in the making, um, major in advertising, marketing, kind of really well rounded out your, and then talk me through law school. Where did I know you decided to get a couple more degrees after SMU? How did that journey go from post school into the management consultant route that we know that you take a good portion of your career to?
Yeah, happy to talk about it. And to anyone that's taking the LSAT and does not do well, I bombed the LSAT my first time. So the reason I worked at Baker Botts for a year, I had interned there in the summers when I was at SMU, and I did horribly. So I took the year, I worked at a law firm, retook the LSAT. But the reason I went to the University of South Carolina was dead serious. Steve Spurrier had just gone to coach there in football, and I had gone from the Jerry Maguire dream to actually reading Drew Rosenhaus's book,
Okay.
and saw how he built his career with Miami hiring Schellenberger and having the connection. And I really thought, I'm going to South Carolina because I'm going to meet all these players that Steve
Right.
Spurrier is bringing into the program. Law school quickly taught me I did not have time to hang out with college
Right.
athletes, and
Right.
the
Right.
NCAA at that time had a lot more rules around, people trying
Right.
to become agents
Position
and
themselves. Yeah.
with, but it was great because I don't think I think that had I not gone to South Carolina, I probably would not have been drawn into the tax law courses
Hmm.
that I took because of the professors that I had there that have a special relationship with both of them, to this day,
Wow.
still consider them mentors. And I finished law school in 2009 when there were no legal jobs, and the only
Mm.
fields where you could fetch an interview were in intellectual property law. I wasn't an
Mhm.
engineer, so I couldn't take the
Yeah.
patent bar, and
Yeah.
tax law. So I it actually in a weird sort of ways kept my, career relevant. But I did ultimately take a year after law school because the interviews were coming in, but the offer wasn't there. And
Yeah.
Ole Miss offered me a fellowship to come do their 1 year MBA program. And I thought there's probably worse places to ride out a recession than a year in Oxford, Mississippi.
For sure. And to your point, I mean, timing can be such a factor that you can't
Absolutely.
control, right? You can be the
Right.
best in your class, have the best scores, but if there's some macroeconomic factors that are happening, like your
Yeah,
hands are tied. They can only do so much.
exactly.
So, like to your point, go and get an MBA. You're still meant to enjoy your life, right? Like,
Right.
go. You obviously are a football fanatic and sports fanatic. Why not go to the Grove for a little bit?
To the Grove.
What was the MBA experience like? What now that you had seen an undergrad experience at SMU, you got a law degree, MBA. For those, how many people can they talk to that have all three that can kind of shed light to it? Kind of what are the experiences like? Those maybe interested in one or the other, the JD, MBA. How do you advise those folks?
So I'll first talk about law school. So I'm not one of those jaded people that says nobody should go to law school. I would tell people if the only reason you're going to law school is because you want to make a lot of money or you don't know what you want to do, it's
Mhm.
a very expensive endeavor if it's not
Mhm.
something where you're just completely passionate about,
Yeah.
trial law, or you're not very passionate about reading and
Mhm.
writing hours and hours every day.
Right.
So I think
Definitely.
if hey, I understand what the practice of law entails and that's what I want to do, go for it. Like I think it can be a very rewarding, career path. I have friends that are still in private practice and actually enjoy their jobs. I also
Right.
know a lot of people that went for the wrong reasons, and were very, very miserable, and it was tough for them to find or kind of re-navigate where they wanted to go in their career.
Absolutely.
The atmosphere in law school is it does sometimes live up to the hype's the wrong word, but the stereotypes. It's a little competitive. You're
Definitely.
graded on a strict bell curve, so things can get really stressful. So business school was such a breath of fresh air, right?
Right.
It's mostly
Collaborative.
right. It's
Yeah.
collaborative. It's projects. If everyone gets 100, in theory, everyone gets an A, right?
Right.
So I found that to be a lot more fun. To me, business school was a lot of fun, but I'd also gone through it right on the heels of finishing
Right.
3 years,
Lots. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, in the bar
Yeah.
exam.
Everything
And I
was fun
do know
from
for
there.
some folks that had just come into the MBA with less work experience, some of it moves a lot faster. So
Yeah.
that was a little bit of a change, but great experiences of both.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit of a tax specialty while in law school. What is that what led you to KPMG? Kind of walk us through, hey, you've got, maybe the job environment's perform is a little bit better. Um, Kind of what were your options, and then how did management consulting become kind of the career of the future that you were
Yeah.
going to pursue?
Yeah. Happy to talk about that. So my first job after finishing law school, passing the bar, and getting an MBA was valeting cars in Buckhead.
Nice.
So yeah, I made it right. Jerry Maguire
Yeah.
dream.
There we
I
go.
was, I was I was parking the cars of athletes, so I was working with them in some
Leaving
capacity.
your number in there.
Right, exactly. Like hire me.
Yeah.
Um, so I wound up moving to Atlanta because that was where the bulk of
Yeah.
my interviews were. And I thought, hey, if they're showing the most interest, then let's go there. And I had a friend that lived there and had, a spare room that I
Hmm.
could rent from them. So, ultimately I get an offer at KPMG first in their state and local tax practice. So, you know, the pay was not at all what I expected. I was probably getting paid in line with a first year audit
Hmm.
associate, which was
Yeah.
sort of, a kick in the gut after having gone to
Right.
grad school. But
Right.
at that time, the resume builder credentials, the experience were more
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And in less than a year in, I switched to mergers and acquisitions tax. And that's when I really caught the deal bug and
Okay.
realized I really, really liked working in M&A. The
So
problem
what was that?
was,
What just to like
yeah,
what do you have like what was it about the deal, or kind of was it the pace, the movement, kind of seeing the transaction go through that you were like, ooh, I like this, fits well. This is kind of
yeah.
matches my style.
All of the above, right? And I think in a truly sincere way, it's the corporate version of sports agency, right? It's company spots another company that fits this profile. Let's make a deal happen and let's negotiate and get
Perfect.
through all of these
Yeah.
intangibles to make it close and then make it work in the post close scenario. So all of those factors were super interesting to me.
Yeah.
The one area of M&A that was not interesting to me was, unfortunately, tax, which I was doing. And
Right.
so I was very fortunate, though, that I was at the Big Four, and why I'm a huge advocate for, starting your career at those firms
Mm-hmm.
is I was able to transfer internally to
Mm.
the M&A strategic services group. And through that, it's where I really developed the M&A and strategy skills that are what I really enjoy doing on a day-to-day basis.
And so you were essentially there for 6+ years, kind of in that role. What were some of the fond memories, or some of the deals, or maybe you don't have to get into specifics, but some of those moments where you're like, "Oh, I'm hooked. I want to do this," or "Hey, I've got some good value to add here. This is a space I can play in long term."
Yeah. I think one of the deals that was really exciting, we showed up, DuPont was going to sell its performance coatings business, and that was at the time when I think it was Jeff Gordon was driving the NASCAR,
Yeah.
car for them, and he was doing interviews, and we show up and we're like, "Hey, in like 6 months, this is this is not gonna be a DuPont company," which was it was like, "Okay, I'm not saying I'm changing the world. It's like, okay, we're working on really cool
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
gonna make the CNBC headlines. They're gonna make the Bloomberg headlines." And that was really exciting. And then when I worked on a deal where we brought together Allergan in Orange County, they make Botox,
Hmm.
with a different pharmaceutical company, and just kind of seeing all the different factors that come into play to make those deals happen, all the stakeholders across, multiple continents, right? It was just it was really cool, and we were also getting to travel to a lot of these places, which was fun, especially in your 20s, getting to see places not only in the US, but
Right.
around the globe that you normally wouldn't be able to see.
What are some of the things we take for granted from the headline readers of these big transactions that you guys are, a little bit of behind the curtain for maybe those folks who want to work in M&A and strategy and kind of play that role? Is it, I think we maybe mentioned earlier, the people side of it is the true skill versus the hard numbers, right? Some of those things that maybe you could shed some light to.
So I think that in big public corporate mergers, those largely are not going to blow up because of people issues. It's largely just driven by shareholders and the board of directors, right?
Mhm.
So if there's personality clashes, you might be miserable, but it's not going to kill a deal most of the time. But transitioning into private equity M&A, where a lot of times you're playing in the middle market, so you're buying founder owner businesses. So
Mhm.
it was a transition for me, right? I was used to speaking consulting jargon, using word like synergies and optimize and align.
Right,
And
right.
when you go talk to someone that's built $100 million business from scratch, they don't know what EBITDA is, right?
Mm.
And
Wow.
so if you go in there and you talk down to them because they aren't as
Yeah. Right.
sophisticated in air quotes as you are, you're going to lose that deal. And it was really interesting knowing that and learning that from DeAndre, who
Yeah.
was my boss at Select Interior Concepts, that we were able sometimes to win deals over higher bidders because they knew that post close they were going to be working with us, and we just didn't come across as people that were going to micromanage and slash heads and ruin everything once we were once the company was ours.
Right. You went, so you did obviously KPMG, PwC, stayed there. You mentioned Select Interior Concepts. What led you to go kind of in-house to that role? Was it that you wanted to be more on the buying side? Just an opportunity you couldn't pass up, or kinda how did that evolve? Because 'Cause that'll kinda take us to where stuff you're doing now, right?
Yeah. Look, there's nothing wrong with a lifelong career in consulting. I think it's great. I knew it wasn't for me, and it was a friend of mine from SMU that had worked at several funds, and he asked me if I was going to ever get off the hamster wheel, stop
Mhm,
advising on
mhm.
deals, and go out and execute them.
Yep.
And I thought I might as well give it a try. And
Yeah.
he knew of a company that was owned by Tribe Capital that's actually Dallas based. They were mashing together two of their portfolio companies into one, doing a direct listing, and needed someone to direct, corporate strategy and M&A. And I thought, hey, let's go do this. And
That's
it
awesome.
was it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And then that's when I really hit my stride and realized this this is what I want to do,
Yeah.
for the long.
Yeah. So you do Select Interior Concepts, 2 years. What was that like? How did that ultimately kind of, dissolve? I think you said maybe it sold,
Yeah.
and then where do you go from there? I know that's kind of maybe the risk of leaving a career in consulting, right? These companies are
Right.
gonna be sold, and then you become maybe a hired hitter that's gotta jump around, but you maybe lose some of that job security. How
Right.
did that play out, and then how did you navigate the next wave?
All right. Well, first, you're absolutely correct. In consulting, you're the product, so you're not SG&A, right? You're
Right,
you're a revenue source.
right.
So there is that level of comfort. So what I like the most about Select Interior Concepts, and we call it SIC for short, just easier to
Okay.
say, was that instead of just coming into the deals during the diligence phase and moving beyond that, I really got to start sourcing and negotiating pre-deal, and that part just really hit that, Jerry Maguire itch because it really
Mhm.
felt like I was getting to wheel deal, get things closed, and it was fun. And it was also fun because I felt like I was good at it. And I think a lot of times when you go into something that's super technical, there's going to be things that are difficult no matter how brilliant you are. And
Mhm.
M&A and strategy, you're rarely more than call it, 6 or 8 feet deep across, an array of subject matters.
Right,
And a lot of it is driven on getting someone to want to work with you. So that was
right.
a lot of fun. And I think that building the rapport with the sellers who are by and large, you know, founder owners who started these businesses,
Yeah.
choice between a truck in college, chose the truck, learned how to lay tile, and now I'm writing them $100 million check. Made me question all my life choices, but it was been fun to be able
Yeah,
to actually see the American dream like lived out by
that's awesome.
vast walks of life.
And so when SIC sold, did you know you see you went to River on, maybe back to consulting a little bit, but more boutique? And then was that just like, "Hey, I'll do this until I find the next right spot," or were you pretty flexible on what would be brought to you?
So we had an activist investor, like you said, that decided to break up the company, and we sold
Mhm.
them, which was actually a really good experience to go
Yeah.
through a sell side process. And at that time, I had been in Atlanta for 11 years, and it was a great place to call home. Still have a lot of good friends there, special memories. But I'm from Texas, and that magnet pulse as you
Yeah.
get older, the
Yeah.
force gets stronger,
Yeah.
and I was like, it's time to go back. And Riveron was a consulting firm. They're based in Dallas, and they were actually building out a commercial strategy, go to market strategy that was
Mhm.
specifically targeting private equity, specifically related to their M&A services. So I actually started in an internal role, helping them build that out.
Cool.
Naturally, people find out that you were a consultant in your former life. They want you to be,
Yeah. Get back
billable. And
to it.
so, yeah, they moved me back into a billable, billable role. And so I knew, I ultimately wanted to do
Yeah.
corp dev, M&A in-house somewhere long term. But, it was a great experience, and I'm still really close friends with a lot of the people
Yeah.
that I work with there.
And I think if anything, right, it just shows your skill set is attractive, right? People are gonna find
Right.
ways to, regardless of where things take you, you're always gonna be in demand or have a use no matter where you go, right? Because 'Cause you're just so diverse in what you're able to do. So tell us about Pave America. How did that opportunity come? What are you doing there now? What's the company about? Where you wanna take it? Kinda the whole Pave
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of a funny story, and it's SMU related. So a colleague of mine at Riveron, who's also a friend, an SMU MBA alum, she was like, I feel like you need to be like doing what I'm doing now, right?
Right.
And she said, I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to set up, a dinner for you, me, and this CFO of a roofing company. And so
Mhm.
told him my whole story, how I loved what I did at SIC, wanted to get back in that saddle. 2 weeks later, he's referred me for the job at Pave America. You'll call it a month after that. I have the
Wow.
offer in hand. So, my job. So Pave America, the company, we're private equity backed. We're backed by Shoreline and Trivest, two private equity firms that are headquartered in Florida. We were, when I started in June, about 450, 500 million in revenue. And the services are parking lot repair and maintenance. So
Mhm.
milling, laying down new asphalt or concrete, seal coating, crack filling, striping, largely focused on commercial customers and doing
Mhm.
repair and maintenance work so that
Mhm.
we're insulated from new construction. My job is to go find other companies that perform those services and
Yeah.
have all of the KPIs that would make them attractive.
Right.
And in the first 16 months, we acquired 15 entities. So we were incredibly busy, and we've taken the company from, 500 million in revenue to just shy of a billion
Wow.
since June 2023. So very busy, but I love it. I mean, I've got two folks that work for me,
Yeah.
three rather, sorry, and great team, a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of I don't know. There's just we're pretty lean at the corporate level, so
Yeah.
everybody gets along. Everybody's willing to do their fair share, even when it's outside of maybe their traditional role,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of fun.
That's amazing. Yeah, you can tell in the times we've met that you really enjoy what you're doing, but you can't get there until you take the journey
Right.
that gets you there. I mean, for those listening who couldn't pick up maybe the amount of travel that your career has involved between management consulting and then even maybe it's a little bit less today, would you say, than when you were at the big four, but still pretty high?
It's
Like,
it's different, right? I think
yeah,
that, and when I was in consulting, I don't think it's the same. Like, when I was in consulting, every Monday morning or Sunday night, you flew out, and then in theory, you flew home on the last flight home Thursday. Many times that bled into Friday. And sometimes you'd get there and there would be nobody from the client, and you just had a bunch of consultants that lived in Atlanta fly to
Excellent.
Cleveland,
Yeah.
Ohio for 5
Right.
days, and it
Yeah.
did make sense. I think after COVID, a lot of that shifted to where
Got a little more
travel is
efficient.
yeah, it's more as needed. The reason I travel so much now is, generally speaking, founder-owner businesses are they want to meet you, they want to shake
Yeah.
your hand, and they wanna have a meal, and so I'm single, so there's times I can stack up 2 or 3
Yeah.
visits a week, so I'm doing it by choice, but there's a lot of people with roles like mine where they may travel overnight, once a week or 2 nights every other
Yeah.
week. I don't to me, that's enough to keep it interesting, but not so much that it feels like you can't have a life back where
Right.
you live. Like, I feel like I have a life in Dallas, whereas
Yeah.
8 to 11 years in Atlanta, like,
On my way.
I didn't live there. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, what's the most miles you flew in a year?
I think it was around 200,000 miles.
Oh my gosh. So you were always though
Yeah.
ultimate status, everything, right?
Yeah.
Which I'm segueing this is now that you were busy enough with everything you're doing, you decided to write a book in 2023, right? How to
It did.
avoid strangers on airplanes that you released. It came out in 2024. End
It
of
did in
okay.
December of 24, yeah.
So I mean, you got to watch the press releases on these. Amazing that you were able to pull this off. Tell us a little bit about how did that even come together, right? We'll, kind of end here on the business of writing a book. I think everyone in their friend says, "Oh, this would be a great idea for a book," or "This would be fun to do." But the daunting task of putting 100 pages together, let alone a couple hundred pages together. How did you think about this? One, where did the idea come from, and then how do you start that process? How do you even get a tangible physical book in a store?
Yeah. So, the idea it's the book's title, How to Avoid Strangers on Airplanes. Living on the road, I was able to see that for whatever reason, human behavior just devolves into absurdity, to put it kindly, once people pass beyond the TSA scanners, and I thought, it's just an interesting subject matter, and whether you travel every week or, call it 4 or 5 times a year, these behaviors are relatable and funny, and so I thought, "Hey, it's probably a cathartic, release for me so that I don't turn into one of those viral passengers that
Right, right.
goes
Yeah,
goes
you see
crazy
those
and
a
winds
lot.
up on." Right,
Yeah,
right, exactly. And but when I started writing it and then actually talked about turning, it's essentially like a journal of, annoying behaviors into a book, I wanted it to be more than a roast. And that's when I saw the parallels between career progression, your career journey, and like air travel.
yeah,
There's times you feel delayed, there's turbulence, sometimes you might even think your flight's canceled and that's the end of it. But no, you really just probably need to wait to take the next flight out and you'll still wind up, where you need to be. It's just going to be a
right.
little bit later. So it was fun to draw those parallels in the
I love
book.
that.
The process of publishing it's crazy, right? You can self-publish on Amazon directly. I used a hybrid publisher, so I did pay for them to secure the ISBN numbers, the Library of Congress numbers. They did,
Okay.
a lot of the editing for me, and then they formatted the book and designed the cover, which a lot of that, some of that's more difficult almost than actually
You
putting
might
the
have,
content
yeah,
onto paper. I think what I did first was I outlined everything, right? Here's the airport stuff,
yeah.
here's the career stuff that follows, and then from there it was kind of easy to fill in, the
Just
blanks
puzzle.
with the
Yeah.
anecdotes, right, in the story. Finding the right publisher is it's tough. If you want to write a book, I highly encourage people to do due diligence on their publishers, on the various publishing houses. What they can promise. It's an industry that has a lot of people that are in it for the wrong reasons. That will take your money, tell you that they can make
Right,
your book a book bestseller, and
right,
maybe they get you up to number one in one category for a day. Then they say that they've
right.
met their end bargain. So I would say be careful in that regard. But if you find one that you trust and you have a realistic expectation of what you want to do with the book and what this publisher has done, you can always look up other authors that have written for them. Go to
Mm,
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, go to Goodreads, and see what the traffic is. And then I would say that if you want to write a book, like for me, it wasn't about hey, this book's going to make me a lot of money,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
not going to make me famous. It was more, there's, I think there's a good story here. I think that, especially people that are looking at how to progress their, through their career and they feel that there's a bumpy ride. I think it's not going to solve the world's problems or, give any advice that you probably don't already know, but maybe it helps keep it, fresh and top of mind, which is
Yeah.
difficult to do in a lot of circumstances when you're stressed.
Man, how many
Um,
people can say they wrote a book? That's so cool. It's got
well,
to be a good accomplishment. Make you feel
right.
proud, right? As you should. And
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
I'm sure. And such a fun story to tell. And I can't wait to have you come speak to it and have host a luncheon. You can kind of do a little readout or something. Because I
That'd
think
be great.
tying the parallels of career to flight is an awesome concept that everyone can kind of relate to. And then looking back, who knew 18-year-old Brandon stepping on the hilltop, taking his English and advertising and marketing classes, he was going to be an author one day, right? You thought Jerry Maguire all the way. You did become the deal guy and are still the deal guy, but you put that degree to work. So, Brandon, this has been awesome. Thank you for making the time. Excited to have you on again, maybe for book number
Absolutely.
2 or some more career advice in M&A in that space. But again, thank you all for you do for SMU. And we'll look forward to chatting again soon.
Sounds good. Go Ponies.
Pony up. Thank you to our incredible sponsors, Security National Bank, Hilltop Property Tax, Mignon Steakhouse, Sound of a Rose Podcast, and the SMU's Cox School of Business for making this all possible.